Mike Braun's public safety plan, Jennifer McCormick's abortion rights plan, plus secrecy around the cost of state executions, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending October 11th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, Republican gubernatorial candidate Mike Braun proposed a series of policies aimed at public safety. They include increasing criminal penalties and improving access to mental health care resources. Braun proposes harsher sentences for people who deal what he describes as lethal drugs like fentanyl and meth. At the same time, Braun wants to continue investments in drug prevention and recovery while also allowing more telemedicine in mental health care. Braun's proposals would pour more money into state police salaries and law enforcement training. The Republican also wants to protect qualified immunity for police, which largely shields law enforcement from lawsuits. Braun received backlash years ago for his proposal to reform qualified immunity in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, which he quickly dropped. Braun says he would also involve more state resources and personnel in helping federal authorities enforce immigration laws, which includes continuing to send National Guard troops to the border in cooperation with border state officials. Do Braun's public safety proposals strike the right balance? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief of Mirror Indy, and Leslie Bonilla Muñiz, reporter for the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Ann DeLaney, does this plan strike the right balance in public safety?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's obviously aimed at trying to repair what damage he had done to law enforcement by going after the immunity question for law enforcement officers. But no, if he had bothered to serve out his term in the legislature, he might have recognized the fact that his party, in a bipartisan effort, reformed the judicial, criminal justice provisions and the penalties, and gave an awful lot of thought to it. And the supermajority passed it. Okay, and this is a relatively recent development, and it strikes exactly the right balance between penalizing the conduct we don't want to encourage and realistically figuring out how to spend resources to keep our society safe. As far as the mental health provisions go, I'm all for that. That's good, and that's already being undertaken. So it's really not particularly innovative from that point of view. And the third part of this is, I know he was in Washington for a long time, and maybe he forgot that there are federal functions and state functions. But foreign policy is a federal function, and he should not be talking about sending National Guard troops from Indiana at Indiana taxpayer expenses down to Texas so that the Texas generals can order our troops around, which is what's happening now. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's pandering is what that is. That and the increased penalties are pandering to the voters. It's not realistic. The legislature dealt with that problem successfully.
Braun already picked up endorsements from several police organizations, the FOP, the Indiana State Police Alliance. So I don't think he needed to do anything on qualified immunity. Do you find that part of this plan a little puzzling?
Not really, because he got it wrong to begin with, and he knew that, and then he talked to law enforcement and changed his mind. He did that years ago, and so it doesn't make it makes perfect sense that it's part of this plan. I'm glad Ann brought up criminal code reform. I think Greg Sturwald said it best at the time. The motivation for that reform at the time was to separate the people we're scared of from the people we're mad at, right?
Right.
And the mad at are the ones that are committing crimes that are motivated by, or not motivated by, but caused by mental illnesses, and we need to identify that and separate it, so we're not just putting everybody in the same population. And this plan, Mike Braun's plan, addresses that, and it doubles down on it. It coordinates law enforcement, or it advocates for better coordination for law enforcement and better funding for mental health. That's all great, and that criminal code reform was bipartisan too.
What about the increased penalties?
And this should be. Well, I think the legislature's looking at that every year. I mean, they did. And
they haven't done it.
Well, they haven't.
I mean, there's been a mixed bag of what they have.
On illegal immigration, look, I don't think it's particularly helpful when it's not helpful at all, frankly, when Donald Trump goes on a national debate and talks about eating dogs and cats, because it diminishes from, like, what are the real world impacts of illegal immigration in states. And so when DeSantis and these guys were first sending, the first guys to send their National Guard troops to the border, I was like, all right, this is pandering. But I'm becoming won over pretty quick on the idea that the states do have to, there are federal functions, and when they're failing, and you have the Mayor Logansport this week who said, hey, we're a community of 18,000 people. We can't take 10,000 Haitian immigrants. We don't know what the impact's going to be, but forget illegal immigration because we can't have a real conversation about it. When New Carlisle is going to open a new data center, we ask a lot of questions about that. It's celebrated, and then we ask a lot of questions about it. What's the impact going to be on housing? What's the impact going to be on utilities? What's the impact going to be on healthcare, schools, public safety? We ask those questions in that context, but when you ask that in the context of illegal immigration, it's like, all right, bigot, get out of here. And it's ridiculous.
But
and
the Haitians are not illegal immigrants.
I understand that, but immigrant populations that are coming into the
All right, well, that's
state,
an allocation of resources question.
That was just the example. That was just the example in the last 48 hours of immigrants, illegal or not, coming into the country. Unless you believe none are coming in, and there is no impact.
Well, I think that's what makes this country strong, is that we get immigrants.
That's great, but asking real questions about what the impact is isn't bigotry, isn't trolling, it isn't pandering. It's none of those things.
Right,
that needs to be asked, and it needs to be controlled. And the states are feeling the brunt of that more than ever, which is why a guy like Mike Braun and all these other governors are sending their troops there.
Well, Mike Braun might have voted for the proposal that was bipartisan in Congress to deal with the border security, but he didn't.
So I think the conversation around immigration, refugees, is very knee-jerk, and it doesn't take into account all the things we need to consider. I do agree that we need to have a conversation about economic impact. What happens when 10,000 people come into a community of 18,000 and they can't support it? But and we do make it sound like every time you ask a question, it's, oh, you're a bigot, you're racist. I think we need to actually have the conversation and not being so knee-jerk about the conversation. But what does happen? What does happen to people who already need services in this country, in our state, who may now not get those services? We're not asking those questions. We don't. That's something that has been frowned upon. It's been taboo to talk about those things when we do need to talk about those things, because what about, we are already in a housing crisis in Indianapolis. We are in a housing crisis. What happens when we bring other people in? What about the people that are already living on the streets, that have been living here, that are citizens here? We need to have a comprehensive conversation about how this affects everyone versus just knee-jerk, well, you're racist, you're prejudiced. Now, to the question about sending troops down to the border, I don't quite understand that. I do have a problem with that. I wonder why. What is going on that you feel like Indiana needs to be all the way down in Texas? And what is the cost of that? There's a lot of things, I think, with his proposals that I have questions about. It reminded me a little bit of compassionate conservatism, a throwback, because we care about mental illness. We want to work on. Those were the days. It was a little throwback to me. So I'm all over the place because he's all over the place. So I'm trying to hit everything he's talked about. So mental illness. Comprehensive. Yeah, maybe that's the word. I'm being comprehensive because he's comprehensive.
I want to ask about the mental health piece of this, because he's advocating not just to continue what we're doing, but to expand even more. Last week on this show, we talked about the Behavioral Health Commission coming out with their newest recommendation for mental health services in Indiana, being that they need to grow beyond what they did in the budget 2 years ago. How big a boost, as we look at the crowded funding priorities, how big a boost to something like that is Mike Braun coming out and saying, yes, we need to expand mental health services?
How big a boost? Can you rephrase?
I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt, but does it, as you're talking about the priority, does it push it over the top? Is a good way to put it.
I think that it certainly helps, but like when we're talking about Medicaid and education as swamping our budget, and then, there's also these kind of undercurrents of things that are very expensive that are going to be popping up this session, like roads. They want to they're thinking about, an overhaul, or at least finding more funding, utilities also massively expensive. We might be talking about, delaying plant retirements and stuff like that. I think that it certainly helps, but I think that there's just a lot competing there. But I will say that for his part, he also did very specifically avoid drug users in his plan for tackling the drug crisis. It was very focused on distributors, and I think that those two things kind of go hand in hand, where he's kind of, pushing some compassion and help for people that are negatively impacted by this and going really hard after those who, make a living, make money off of it.
Yeah. All right. Reproductive rights have been a centerpiece of Democrat Jennifer McCormick's gubernatorial campaign from the beginning. And proposals McCormick unveiled this week flesh out how she would confront the state's near-total abortion ban in the governor's office. McCormick has long said she'd use the platform of the governor's office to advocate for changes to the state's abortion ban, but short of that, she says she would appoint people to state boards and commissions that are, in her words, more supportive of women and healthcare providers.
I mean, not following the law is not an option, but there is a lot of space on educating people, making sure that they have resources where they need to go, making sure we're having a targeted effort to keep clinics open so that when women are in trouble, they have somewhere to go.
McCormick says as governor, she would also fight to ensure medical records, particularly terminated pregnancy reports, remain private. Mike O'Brien, how much can McCormick use the governor's office to expand abortion access further than it currently exists without changing state law?
Well, for abortion specifically, she can't really do anything. That law is pretty tight, and that was on purpose. The legislature took control of that, and they're really not in the mood right now, Republican or Democrat, to give.
I think Democrats would be in the mood for it, but yes.
Well,
I see your point.
The Republican legislature. Okay, good clarification. The Republicans in the legislature are not in the mood to give expanded flexibility and power to the executive branch on this or anything else. Right now, she could, but through the state's Medicaid program, through other. We saw under Mike Pence. Reductions in funding for Planned Parenthood, not even abortion, but just like access to
contraception,
those types of resources. Yeah. So there is some flexibility if you're just thinking statute, the four corners of that law administratively on how you could expand it. I am interested. We've talked a lot in like 3 years now about the political upside for Democrats of making abortion a centerpiece, and we haven't seen it ever materialize. I'm as interested as anyone to see if it works. Democrats have put this right square in the center of everything they're talking about. McCormick's incredibly creative about how, if you watch her ads, I'll give her credit. She's incredibly creative in how she talks about running as a Republican. Never really corrects the record that she's now running as a Democrat, but then pivots right into abortion. And I'm interested to see if it works. I'll be as surprised as anybody if it does. But let's have the election to find out, I guess.
There have been a lot of questions from Democrats about, you're still going to have a Republican legislature. Maybe the Democrats break the supermajority in the House, but they're definitely not going to break it in the Senate, and they're certainly not breaking the majority. It's literally impossible. So there have been a lot of questions from Democrats to McCormick. How could you possibly actually move the needle on abortion?
Well, there are ways.
Do these policies make sense to you?
Yeah, they do. I mean, we're talking about the funding for Planned Parenthood and contraception and things like that she can influence. She can also influence the appointments by the governor to different boards, like the Medical Licensing Board, so that doctors can be assured that they're not going to be targeted by Todd Rokita and the Medical Licensing Board when they shouldn't be. And so there are definite appointments that she can make, and she will control FSSA about releasing that information, and she can fight the Attorney General about releasing that information so that women who have legal abortions won't be targeted by our Attorney General. So there are definite things that she can do to make it better. She can't cure the problem, and we won't cure the problem until we get a federal law on this or we get control of the legislature, because the supermajority in the legislature is not interested in listening to what the voters want. The overwhelming majority of voters in Indiana want more access to abortion for different reasons. Not, on demand, as the Republicans like to say, and not up to the 9th month, which it isn't legal anywhere, by the way. But when you have situations which mandate abortions for a variety of either health reasons or, you get young children that don't realize that that they're impregnated until after the window passes, those kinds of things they should have access to. And that's what voters want. It'll be an issue this election.
I should make a future poll question. Which is going to happen first? A federal abortion rights law signed into law, or Democrats take back control of the Indiana legislature?
Well, we got to redistrict
first. Because of the
gerrymandering.
I can't believe I opened that door. We just talked about this a little bit with Mike Braun. Mike Braun advocates for things. How much the legislature is going to play into that is really up to the legislature. Here, when McCormick talks about using the governor's office as a bully pulpit to push them to do a public referendum or push them to make changes, is that really going to make a difference if she's governor and the legislature is controlled by Republicans?
Yeah, you can say what you want, but it really comes down to, who's in that chair and in those meeting rooms at the state capitol building. Something else too, we talked about, what room is there within agencies to interpret things differently and on those boards to change out members, but we've seen that lawmakers have had an appetite recently for curtailing the actions that agencies can take and even removing some of that discretion or requiring greater oversight. So I think, I don't know, there's a potential for it to turn into sort of a back and forth, like outdoing each other, like, oh, I found this loophole. Oh, we've legislated a way to close that. So
I want to go back to the point Mike made towards the end of his piece, which is we've been talking for now, 2+ years since the abortion ban was passed, about Democrats trying to use abortion to capitalize at the polling place. We didn't really see it in 2022. Now we're staring at the face of 2024. Do you think it can be a motivating factor in this state?
I just want to make one point. I thought we saw it in 2022. We should have had a Republican landslide in 2022, and we didn't.
Yeah, but statewide it didn't make a difference. And they picked up a seat in the House and lost a seat in the Senate. So do you think it can be a major factor for voters in this state?
Yes and no. No, not 100% no. Because I think what people at the State House, people who really are into government care about this issue. But does the regular average person get wrapped up in abortion? I don't think so. I think there's a certain class of people who care. I don't think a lot of people even really are still aware of what is the rule, what is the plan, what happens until it's that time, until I didn't mean to get pregnant. I'm pregnant. Now what do I do? Then you actually care, and then you're like, oh, we have a ban. I didn't know we had a ban. A lot of people are there. We don't want to actually acknowledge that a lot of people live in that space of we don't know what's going on. So the people who actually it matters to, I don't think they're coming out to vote because I don't think they even realize that they can make a change or that even need to make a change yet.
Can this have an impact on some of these tight suburban state house races?
Oh, I think in close races it can make a difference. Yeah, I think if you're, and they are, Democrats are running really targeted, data-driven campaigns on voter turnout and things like that. It can make a difference.
I want to add another point. When we're talking about voter turnout, the people who are voting are not the ones that we really need to hit. The ones that really this bill really affects, the ban really affects. Those are the people who are not voting.
Yeah, I think they're already motivated to vote, and they're already out with us.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're probably already showing up. This is never a top 3 issue is the problem. It's a top 10 issue, but it's a top 8 issue. It's 8th at the top 10.
Yeah.
That's
Among women? I don't think so.
Okay.
Among the women, among a certain segment of women, among a certain segment of women.
All right, the Indiana Capital Chronicle reported this week the state refuses to disclose how much it paid for a new execution drug that will allow it to begin carrying out the death penalty for the first time in more than a decade. The long delay in executions was primarily centered on a lack of execution drugs. The state secured a new drug, pentobarbital, earlier this year, but the state has refused to share the name of the pentobarbital supplier, how much it purchased, and how much it paid for the drug. A 2017 law shielded information about the source of execution drugs from public disclosure, but that law doesn't mention cost. The Capital Chronicle filed a records request with the Department of Correction, but the agency denied that request. Leslie, realistically, would knowing the cost of this drug or the cost of executions really change anyone's mind about whether the state should still perform them?
I mean, there's reporting out there. Records are pretty sparse, but there's reporting out there that states are paying enormous sums of money for not very much product. We're seeing Arizona 2023 paid, $1,000 a gram. And it seems like that price is going up because recent reporting that 2023, Idaho paid like well over $3,000 a gram.
Well, I mean, you have a case of not a lot of companies want to produce this stuff in the first place. So the supply of it is so scarce that it's driving up the price even more.
Right. And so, I mean, there's that. But I don't really know that, $1.5 million here or a couple $1 million there, I don't know that that would really change the mind of people who already, believe or don't believe in capital punishment. But I do think that that transparency of knowing, sort of a little bit more about this deeply secretive process that ultimately could result, in the end of an inmate's life, of a Hoosier citizen's life, I think that that transparency is worthwhile just on its face, even if it doesn't change anyone's mind.
Why hide it?
That's my question. Why can't we know who's producing it and what the cost is? I think that's very important as we talk about prison reform, as we talk about how much it costs to house an inmate. All these things when we're constantly talking about putting money into public safety, what is the cost of executing someone? And to the point of the cost of $3,000 per gram, then how many grams are we don't know how much it takes to actually end someone's life. We don't know how long it takes. We don't know we don't know a lot of things about the process. And so it just seems very, the transparency, the lack of transparency seems to be on purpose because there seems to be a lot of things, nefarious things, it seems. So remove that so we will know what exactly is transpiring, so we don't, it doesn't leave up to conspiracy, because when you don't know, everybody has their own thoughts.
The motivation, it would seem, behind shielding public disclosure of who they're getting the drug from was about increasingly companies didn't want people to know because they would get boycotted or things like that. And so that's part of why it became impossible for a while for states to get access to these drugs. So I get that motivation, whether I agree with it or not. But why are you shielding the information about the things Oseye just talked about? How much it takes, how much you're paying for it, how it works. Why does all of that have to be secret too?
I have no idea. But I think that what confuses me about it further is that people that have arrived at the position that they support capital punishment, the death penalty, didn't get there because of a cost-benefit analysis of comparing incarcerating an individual for the rest of their life or putting them to death.
Yeah, they weren't looking at a spreadsheet.
No, you're not like looking to perform on somebody, so I don't understand. And you're conflating two different belief systems, and one is for Republicans that tend to more often support the death penalty, fiscal conservatism with being hard on crime, and those things are separate. Like, Republicans will spend virtually any amount of money to be tough on crime, right? You're not getting hit politically for running up the budget on
right. So why do you need to hide?
Crime.
So then why do you need to hide how much you're spending on this?
Seems like you should be able to brag about it.
Why is
I understand
this?
concealing the company's identity. Though,
Sure,
sure.
I get the motivation behind that.
Yeah, but not the cost and not how many grams. And it's just that they're basically, they may support the death penalty, but they're ambiguous about all the things surrounding it. What does it take? What do people suffer in that? And on and on and on. And frankly, I understand the need for justice, and I understand in many cases the need families feel for revenge if you've got a murdered loved one. I do understand that. But you also have to balance that, not just about the cost of incarcerating, but the reality of life. When they get to be 55 or 60 years of age, they're not a threat to anybody anymore. Murders are not committed by people that old. Violent crime comes between 18 and 35, and after that, it's almost inconsequential. And yet we're paying for them because revenge or punishment or whatever, put them out on the street. Let them earn their own way when they get to be that age. Save the money of incarceration.
What about that?
Forget the death penalty.
That's probably going further than some people would want.
It's not just... They're not a threat anymore, okay? Yeah. And that's the point.
All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose a non-scientific online poll question. And this week's question is, should Indiana get rid of the death penalty? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you whether Indiana should ban digital manipulation that creates falsified images and campaign ads. 96% say yes, 4% say no, which tells us there are some Republicans who watch this show who think we should get rid of those. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, finally, the city of Beech Grove here in Marion County announced this week it's temporarily changing its name. From November 1st through the 3rd, the city will be known as Beech Grove Taylor's version. That's in honor of Taylor Swift, who will perform in Indianapolis that weekend. Mike O'Brien, fun or cringy?
I have two daughters who I have 2 daughters and 0 tickets for 3 concerts, and so I've been treading really lightly about any criticism or
anything having to do with
Taylor Swift.
So fun is your vote.
I'm going
on
with
this
fun.
one.
It's so fun. It's all fun. We're having fun.
Fun or cringy? Do you like this?
I'll leave it at fun for the same reason.
Fun or cringy? Yeah, I did appreciate.
I don't get it.
I need
though.
Taylor
gotta
Nation
tell you.
coming at me.
I'll leave it at fun so no Swifties come after me.
Yeah, exactly. They're a legend.
Well, now I regret asking the question at all.
Well, you can take the opposite position.
No, absolutely not. Fun. It's all fun. Everything is fun. That's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, Oseye Boyd of Mirror Indy, and Leslie Bonilla Muñiz of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.